Do you want 30 days filled with kettlebell workouts for free? Check the first link in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, we have another episode of the Kettle Nights podcast, and I have with me again Quintin Torres. For those of you, ladies and gentlemen, who don't know who this distinguished gentleman is, please watch the previous podcast episode or listen to it. We were talking about the interesting ideas back in the, 70s, 80s, 90s, back when the Soviet Union was still a thing. And when the Soviet Union was competing against the United States, not just on a political side, even though we found out that everything is connected politically, but on a sports side. And we found out that the Soviets had a system that was so fascinating, and we took a deep dive, but we had to stop. I think that the last podcast was like, what, 1.5 hours or 1 hour and 45 minutes? 2 hours something, right? And so we said we had to do it again, and here we are doing it again. And Quintin, the last time, first of all, welcome back to the podcast. Awesome.
Thank you.
And awesome, man. So awesome. And the last time you mentioned that we're now taking another deep dive into the systems and how it all came together. But for those of you who are watching this or listening to this for the first time, I highly recommend, please check out the previous episode before checking out this one. So Quintin, you have the stage. Let's get it rolling.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So where we previously left off in our conversation is we were kind of establishing, we have two timelines that we're kind of like keeping track of right now. And they're both simultaneously running parallel to each other. There's the timeline of the sports development science of the Soviet Union that started in the 1950s and progressed all to the late 1980s. Simultaneously, there's a sports performance development of the United States that was spearheaded by Dr. Yessis and Marv Marinovich they were happening in parallel with each other, right? So I'm kind of constructing these two timelines, and eventually they're going to intersect, and we're going to arrive more into like present day of what's going on with the development and the continued evolution of sports performance science. Okay.
Fascinating.
So let's start on the one that's definitely that I love talking about the most, is like the Soviet Union history and how everything went down, because it's such a fascinating moment in human history, how the Soviet system worked and how a lot of these communist systems work, and you could even see it in a lot of countries today. Okay, so where we left off is we're establishing that the Soviet Union developed a lot of these sports sciences. Like they developed plyometrics, they developed like box jumps. They basically had unlimited resources, unlimited manpower to create the best training methods to get their athletes better. And this was very, very relevant. If you look at the historical timelines of the Olympic Games, I got to know that in 1988, the Soviets doubled the amount of gold medals that the U.S. had. Wow. So at the peak, it wasn't the peak of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was on its way into collapse, but it definitely was the peak of Soviet sports, especially in Winter Olympic Games. You could tell that the Soviets were pushing far, far ahead. And as you saw in that documentary, Red Army, you kind of got a glimpse into the reality of how these athletes had to live. They were living at military bases under armed guard at all times. They weren't allowed to see their family. Their training programs were absolutely relentless. The amount of work these guys had to put in is considered ironically unhealthy, in my opinion, even though sports is supposed to be attached to our vitality and our health, etc. So these guys were pushed beyond limits. They were forced to live in conditions that were not humane, not fulfilling, but they felt throughout their whole lives that they had a duty and they had an obligation to the Soviet Union. They were all comrades. And they were raised under an ideology that you're not an individual person, You are a cog in the wheel for the betterment of the state.
Exactly. And one thing that I want to add to this is I just recently watched a episode, I don't know what it was, a podcast or a video, can't remember, but it doesn't matter. The guy was saying in the video, the reason why totalitarian, right?
Yes, yes.
So the reason why totalitarian states do not permit religion, or at least they don't further the idea of religion, is because it liberates the mind of the person who's practicing religion, thinking that there's a higher power that is beyond being human or beyond the state. So the totalitarian government or the regime wants you to believe that they are deities, right? They are the gods, and you are supposed to worship the god of the government in that case. And that's why it creates this hive mind mentality, right, that we talked about the last time, which is visible in the Red Army documentary, where these hockey players play with each other almost blindly because they believe, or at least they are forced to believe, that's debatable, but they belong to this hive, right, to this one idea of the government being God, and they are the disciples, so to speak, right?
Right.
Fascinating.
So what happens when you force the people to start thinking along those systems is that it creates a cult of personality, where now the people become so dedicated, and there's a very, like, I really study totalitarian governments and dictators. Like, I have a strange fascination with all this, that and it's very, very obvious in North Korea right now. You can watch documentaries and you can listen to firsthand accounts of people who actually got out of North Korea. They talk about it. Well, first you have to restrict the people's language. Certain words are not allowed to be said. Certain verbs, nouns, and pronouns are not allowed to be said under law. So once you control the language, then you actually simultaneously start controlling the thinking of the people. Like in North Korea, you are not allowed to say I. You're not allowed to say me. Whenever, there was this one lady named Naomi Park. She survived North Korea, escaped, crazy escape. She's on the Joe Rogan Experience. And she talks about how when she was in school and they would all get up to like wash their hands after lunch, like you were not allowed to say, I'm washing my hands. You have to say we, or we, all of us are washing our hands. Even if you're doing something as an individual, you have to create the language of us and we.
It's all about what. It's all about the collective, right? Yeah.
The collective.
Yeah.
And so we don't really know what that does to the brain. We don't really, no one's ever like tried to extrapolate studies and measurements of when you restrict verbal, auditory language for human beings, what that does to how their neurons flow and how they think. We don't really know. So when you look at the Soviet Union, and they were almost like telepathic with their sports and with their teamwork, who knows what's really happening? Like, no one's ever been able to recreate that situation and study it.
Yeah, so that's a good point. This is impossible to recreate in a double-blind controlled study. It would almost be inhumane, right? But there must be something attached to it. Yeah. Oh, this is fascinating stuff, man. I see your point. So, yeah.
Now there is a particular system where you do start to see this occur, this strange phenomenon. I don't want to say telepathy, because I feel like we're kind of going a little bit too far into fiction and fantasy, but there are systems still in place where you start to see this connection amongst people and teamwork that can almost happen beyond words. You see this in militaries, in high-level elite squads in militaries, high-level elite groups and teams, where they train so many hours together, spend so much time together, and they're so motivated for a common goal. We start to see these weird phenomenons amongst the team, their energy, their communication, their ability to execute goals. The efficiency gets insanely high. And Like you see it with like special forces.
Mm.
You see that in some groups of the Spetsnaz in Russia, SEAL Team 6 in the United States, which created a lot of fame and popularity to this, Delta Force. You can start, because a lot of the times they'll have to operate and conduct something that is very high stakes without using words. So you kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Similar to like the hockey team.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a little side thought. But back to like our main topic at hand when it comes to the Soviet sports. So Soviets, their sciences are blowing the United States away. They're winning medals. Their athletes are just they're destroying us, right? We really got into fitness training and aerobic training from Cooper's scientific research, and they really got into sports training from Dr. Yuri Wachowski's scientific research. Now, slowly you start to see some of these ideas trickle into the United States here and there from the work of Dr. Yessis, who was allowed to go to the Soviet Union, learn knowledge, and he was slowly but surely allowed to bring that back into the United States. But he's just one guy. And back then, communication was very limited. Like telephones were not very great. You couldn't text anyone. There were no pagers. Like you had to send letters that were written on pen. You know,
people don't. Yeah, people forget this. Yeah,
they had to typewriter and try to type out information and send
Morse code. That had to send over doves and stuff, right?
Yeah.
This
so information
compared to today.
Slow.
Yeah,
information was
incredible.
Very slow to spread. So as things are progressing, we were able to try to fight back. The United States was able to try to find ways to compete because one, we had access to a large, healthy pool of athletes, including African-American athletes, which gave us a big advantage in high anaerobic, high-speed sports competitions. It did give us a big advantage. But in the one sporting event where that wasn't necessarily a factor, hockey, because there's not a lot of traction in hockey. You're not pushing hard off the floor. Everything slides. So those advantages that African-Americans have, and also just to given the social economic class system of the United States back in that day, African Americans weren't huge into hockey. It was mostly dominated by Caucasians in the United States. And so in Russia, that was like where they could really pull ahead. And that's why the Russian hockey system, and the fact that Russia is like mostly winter, like they have winter like 8 months out of the year, like 7 months out of the year. They have long winters. So hockey was really available. That was a good option for them. And they really started to push ahead, especially when they got those 5 Soviet hockey players. I have their names. And I want to make sure that we're said. So with Fedorov, Loridnov, if I pronounce that correctly, Fetisov, Konstantinov, and Kosyov. So those were the main guys on the Russian hockey team, the USSR hockey team, that were developing like this elite system of hockey. They were just unstoppable. They had the hive mind at work. They were developing new theories of hockey play. And no one knew how they were doing it because it was so secretive in the Soviet Union. Like there was so much restriction. There was so much like sports, nuclear energy, and military propaganda were the 3 most secretive industries in the Soviet Union, and they treated it like nothing got in, nothing got out. You know, even like, I mean, can you imagine a hockey player is given the same level of security treatment and the same level of restriction as like the president or someone who knows like top secret information? Like that's how they treated it.
Yeah.
So
it's unfathomable. But one question I have: why did they open up then afterwards when they kept it so secretive?
Yes. Okay.
Or I don't want to jump ahead. Maybe that comes later. But
no, it's right. You're right on time. Right on time.
Okay, awesome.
I got notes with me, so I got a good timeline going. Okay. So 1986. All right, the 80s.
Yep.
Magical time.
Yeah.
We go to Ukraine, former Soviet Union territory. We go to a town called Pripyat. And in this town, there's a nuclear power plant that everyone has heard of at least once in their life. Chernobyl.
Chernobyl, yeah.
the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl takes place. There's a great HBO miniseries that kind of plays all this out. It's just called Chernobyl. It's on HBO Max. Watch it. It is so good. It's one of my favorite series of all time. There's a nuclear disaster, and I think the nuclear reactor has some sort of fault to it, and they basically, because the Soviet Union, no one wants to get in trouble when you're living in Russia. All right, if you make a mistake, whether you're hockey, nuclear energy, whatever it is you're doing, no one wants to admit mistakes because the consequences could be jail. And instead of just going to jail, serve your time, you go to hard labor camps, and you live basically. You go to the gulag and you live in a concentration camp for up to 10 years for just making a mistake at work. So everyone is so afraid of accountability. If people start becoming afraid of accountability, it's hard to figure out how things happen. You can't discover the truth, and you just bury it with lies. Lies after lies after lies after lies. And
natural consequences. Yeah.
Yes.
And just, again, stuff makes so much sense. Like the last time we had this discussion, if you follow the framework, it just makes sense. Yeah, I never thought about this, right? If people are afraid of accountability, this means there is almost or not a lot of progress because nobody wants to admit the mistakes. And so, yeah, like you said, you want to bury it with lies. Man, this logical thinking. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, awesome.
And this is part of the reason, this is part of the problem why Western doctrine, philosophies, Western countries, professors don't necessarily take Soviet scientific research seriously. Because when you have authority without responsibility, you have slavery. And if you have ultimate authority over a people, combined with no one wants to take responsibility for anything, no one wants to put themselves in front of the firing squad for anything, you have a nation of slaves now. And you have a nation of slaves that lie to save their own skin and to just fall in line to stay safe. So now you destroy the credibility of the nation.
No, most definitely, yes.
This is the problem we have. But there was an occurrence in this moment in the human race which honestly saved the people of the Soviet Union, and that is scientific truth. Scientific truth cannot be denied because there was a vicious cycle that the Soviet Union needed. The scientific truth pushed the Soviet Union ahead, but it also revealed the bullshit. Oh, excuse my language. It revealed the lies and the corruption and the dishonesty and the slavery simultaneously. So you have these scientists who are trying to extrapolate truth. So the Chernobyl accident happened, and Dr. Where's his name? Dr. Legasov, who is the #1 leading researcher in nuclear energy during the Soviet Union during this time, he refused to accept the lies of why Chernobyl happened because I think it's an RKV-90 reactor, I believe it's called, exploded. The Chernobyl reactor exploded, and no one could figure out why. And everyone's like, there were days that were going by where they were denying that it was exploding. There was radiation. It took Finland, Sweden, and Germany. Their radiation sensors started to pick up on the nuclear fallout in Ukraine days later, and they were telling people, you can't go outside. Children aren't allowed outside. Don't drink the water. Don't eat the food. And this was before the Soviet Union even acknowledged that an explosion happened, because they were saying, like, no, this was your fault. This was your fault. It's not my responsibility. Like, they were just playing the blame game and bumbling this disaster. And that's how the Soviet Union kind of ran, because no one wants to get in trouble. So Dr. Legasov, who was sent there with political party leader Boris, these two guys should be remembered, because they saved a lot of lives. They saved a lot of lives, where they acknowledged the fact that this NKVD reactor exploded somehow. Well, it was due because of cheap technology. You know, because when you got a system of people who aren't motivated, are not incentivized, and they're not pushed to be ambitious, you're gonna be lazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these are human beings. You're gonna be lazy. You're not gonna care as much. You're gonna cut corners. You're gonna want to do whatever you need to do to get the job done.
Yeah.
So you
Just
can
like,
just report to the higher authorities that, yes, we got it done, so please don't arrest me in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Please don't send me to a labor camp too.
But you know what doesn't add up is why do you have this? Yeah, we are being afraid of accountability. I get it, and then mistakes not being recognized, no progress. Yes. Why is there such a stark contrast between the sciences or the situation of nuclear energy in that regard and sports? Because in sports, their life was on the line, so they were performing. But on the other hand, in the nuclear energy sector, it's different. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, because I understand this as well. I mean, if you don't have to perform, you know, to a certain extent, you're getting lazy, yes. But on the one hand, on the sports side, they are thriving, and on the other hand, they're making such huge mistakes. And you know, I don't get the situation, right? So
I hear what you're saying. So the one thing that makes the two industries different is that in the nuclear energy side of things, there are far more variables that could take place, at least in real time, because you have all this like uranium depleted, you know, graphite. Like, I mean, I'm no nuclear engineer. I don't exactly know how these reactors work, but it takes you know, a big team of people to like keep it running. So there's a lot that could go wrong, and if it does go wrong, it goes really wrong because of the radioactive fallout. In sports, if something goes wrong and an athlete tears their ACL, just get a new athlete. Like, but that's not to say they didn't run into very similar side effects. If you like, the training facilities for these Russian hockey players weren't always the best. You know, their equipment wasn't always the highest of quality, especially in the 80s, because, you know, like their economy was kind of crumbling at the seams at this point in the Soviet Union. They, you know, they weren't around, like that one hockey player who wasn't even allowed to visit his dad who was dying.
I remember this. The coach said no. I remember this. In the documentary.
So it's, if you kind of think about it, you have similar problems. They just kind of show themselves in different ways.
Now I get it. Yeah.
Right, and then
okay. So let's push this forward a little bit. So we have this disaster in Chernobyl happening. So what is the exact reason now why the Soviet is now opening up and not being so secretive anymore? It's because they cannot hide the mistakes. I get it, but why do they open up in the sports realm?
Okay, so yes, this is sure. So as Chernobyl happens, it creates this huge disaster, and this was the biggest embarrassment of the Soviet Union. And I can't remember the president's name at the time. It was a bald guy who had a big birthmark on his head.
Gorbachev.
Yes.
Gorbachev.
Can you pronounce his name again? Gorbachev.
Gorbachev. Yeah.
Yeah. So Gorbachev,
I think that was him. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. So Gorbachev was president during this time, and he was slowly realizing that the Soviet communist system is just not working. Like, it's just like the machine is just breaking down at every turn. And he was slowly but surely trying to push light democratic values into the government simultaneously. You know, like it's like, hey, let's have he like did this one thing where let's pretend to vote on whether we want to consider voting. So like a bunch of people like at their Congress, I don't know what this is called in Russia, but like their gathering of politicians, they're like, all right, let's vote to see if we want to even consider the idea of voting. Like they were like pretending, they were like practicing, and like you see a couple of guys like do this. Like you see all these hands raised, like everyone's so scared to be an individual.
Yeah.
So he was lightly trying to push these things in because you know, people were realizing like food shortages were happening. They weren't able to produce oil the same way. Their economy was kind of just falling apart really bad, but no one really knew because information couldn't get in or out, but he knew. He was able to see the numbers. So as he was doing this, so the Chernobyl thing happened, and that really exposed the bumbling and the mistakes that the system was happening with. Like, people had an idea that, listen, the Soviet Union thing doesn't seem like it's cracking all that great. Like, there's a lot of crazy testimonies of people escaping. There's all sorts of things, like their rockets keep going up and crashing. They're losing astronauts like crazy. Like, it looks like they're making a lot of mistakes because, like I said, the scientists want to push innovation, but the workers under the scientists, they just want to get the job done because who cares? Like, I'm I'm working so hard and I'm not getting paid. I'm not getting incentivized. I'm not feeling motivated. So I'm just going to cut corners, make it cheap. And everyone is so afraid of making mistakes. You get this pressure cooker situation where the guy above you is putting pressure on you, then the guy above you is putting pressure on you, then the guy above you is putting pressure on you just to get it done because everyone's so afraid of going to jail. So you get people who cut corners, make things cheaper. They skip out on certain things that need to be quality. They make it lower quality just to get it done fast. They start lying on paperwork. They say certain tests were done that were never done. Like, they just start making up. They start dissolving the truth to save their own skin. And so now this has become undeniable. The Chernobyl incident happens, become undeniable. Everyone realizes that this is just not working, and it costs the Soviet Union a lot of money to fix. A lot of money to fix this thing. And Gorbachev said the Chernobyl incident was the straw that broke the camel's back for the Soviet system. After this, everyone's like, listen, this is not working. Like, it's just breaking down. The politicians did not want to do this anymore. The people were starting to rebel. There was food shortages. Like, it was just falling apart. It was just
they were reaching. I'm assuming then they were reaching for the West for support or for help, or because that's the point that I'm trying to get to. Is I get what's happening, but why open up about the sports? Is it because they are required to do so? Because they see, okay, now everything's breaking down, and now, hey, we need help, guys. Actually, stuff is not working. Is that kind of the system or the situation?
It actually happened more organically than that. So so the system starts breaking down. Eventually, they start like the Berlin Wall is going down, right? Yeah. Gorbachev makes the announcement. He's like, we're going to start adopting more democratic values and switch up the way things happen. So in that moment that happened in the Soviet Union, when everything dissolved, it's kind of like when World War I ended. It's like all at once, everything
I had that thought
kind of like
too.
Stopped.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, like the KGB was out of work. Guards who were at their posts all of a sudden didn't have to be at their posts anymore. Like politicians and senators, they were just grabbing money. People stole a lot from the government and just left. Like like everything got flipped inside out. The public suffered horribly. Being a Russian citizen between 89 and 94, those were some dark days. Those were some tough livings in Russia because you had police authority that kind of broke away, and no one was accountable for anything. It was even worse, and people were just starting to become like tribal. Like that's why Russian organized crime got so crazy, and it's the thing what it is today. Because when you have a government that's not reinforcing systems, they're not pushing their authoritarian agenda anymore. It all kind of just sort of collapses, and people just walk away from their jobs. Now, the next thing you know, you got the local police are controlling the towns now. And those cops could be corrupt. They're human beings. Some of them could be criminals. You know, like it wasn't like the Soviet system was without its problems. Like usually people who thought like robots and didn't value human life or human rights were better candidates to be police commissioners.
So let's move a little bit forward, because I don't want to make this too political now. Just in the sports world, what happened then? So the West came in, I'm assuming.
No, the East left. Everyone left because they had to make money. That's the point that I was trying to get to. The system's breaking down. And so similar like World War I, right? Or even World War II with the Nazis, and everybody was grabbing these engineers, right? Hey, come to us and work for us. We need your knowledge. Yeah. So the system's crumbling, everybody's leaving, so that's how the knowledge gets spread. Yes. And you see it with the hockey team. You see with the hockey
Yeah.
team,
Yeah.
they're like, screw
Yeah.
this. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to the United States and I'm going to
And
get
I'm staying
paid.
there. Yeah, and I'm staying
Yeah,
there. Yeah, that's so fascinating. In the documentary, it's so fascinating how they, how one of them, I think, one of the guys just decided like, no, I'm gonna stay. I'm not going back.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, fighting back, breaking outside this hive mold and this collective idea, and now think, you know what, I'm gonna do this for myself. The system's crumbling anyway, so I'm out of here, right?
Right.
That's the idea. Okay, yeah.
Because why stay? Because I was like, why stay if the public of people, the local public, is becoming hostile, dangerous, unlivable, like they're gonna be like, dude. And Dr. Yuri did the same thing. Like some of the footage you put of your first video of the Soviet training, the colored footage, if you start to look around, there's some people wearing shirts that have English on it.
So that's like, in the U.S. That's even in the U.S. where he met Yeses, probably Dr. Michael Yeses.
Because he had to make money now. His government contract dissolved because there was no government anymore.
Yes.
So he's like, all right, whoever wants to learn, who wants to learn this, who wants to get better, like I gotta get bread. Like Dr. Yuri, he had to get paid somehow. So him and his daughter would start inviting Americans out. They would start traveling to the United States. Now the information's spreading. And now all of a sudden sports gets out of control. This is why sports is what it is today, because the Soviet Union collapsed. Like, and I'm from Michigan. The Detroit Red Wings are our home hockey town. Like, we are hockey town in Detroit. This is what is so crazy, like the lineage of the sports training in my life. So all these, like the Russian Five, they leave the Soviet Union and they join American hockey and they dominate. Yes. I think it was the Red Wings did not win a Stanley Cup for where was it, like 40 years.
Wow.
They did not win a world title for 40 years, and all of a sudden 5 Russian hockey players show up and they become the most dominant hockey team the world has ever seen. I don't even know if it's been broken because I don't follow hockey, but they were legendary. It changed sports. Now you got athletes who are making millions of dollars a year, multi-million-dollar athletes, where they don't have to work full-time jobs anymore like the ABA players or the AFL players of the 1960s and 1970s. We're in the 1980s, going into the 1990s, and sports is booming. And it's all because the performances increased. The performances got better because the training science started to spread now. And now the performances got better. More tickets are getting sold.
People want to see it. Yeah, it's more entertaining. It's more fascinating to watch. So more eyes on the puck in that regard means more money. So more money gets poured into the system and into the training and then everything. Oh, wow, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is how sports. This is why. Remember we were talking about how sports was really low, and all of a sudden it just explodes into this industry that kind of controls culture now. And a key factor is now that the training quality is improved in the West. The quality of training has gotten better, and a lot, like I said, a lot of what we see is copy and pasted and resold Soviet training methods. So Dr. Yuri and Dr. Yesis were trying to push this philosophy into the United States, but it was the 80s. Information was slow to spread. It's very complex. It's very difficult. And at the same time, who's really trying to listen to them? We're Americans. We won the Cold War. We're number one.
American
that's arrogance, American muscle.
Now
we got Arnold Schwarzenegger movies.
Yeah.
We got Sylvester Stallone movies.
Who's an Austrian, right? Who's an Austrian? That's so funny. Yeah. But you know what? You know what's so funny is exactly what you're saying is why Mark Ripito from Starting Strength. You're probably familiar with him. He wrote the book Basic Barbell Training, which is a great piece of content when it comes to barbells. I've learned a lot from this book. I've reread it a couple of times. I love it. Yet he's very he's against kettlebells, and he preceded his statement on why he doesn't like kettlebells with this, well, we won the Cold War, so who cares? So it's just this, right? It's you say this, you call it American arrogance, or just being arrogant towards the unknown of the other side, coupled with the fact that they're not credible anyway. Look at how they
Right.
messed up Chernobyl, right?
Right.
So many factors come together that really makes me understand now why it's such a hard battle. But at the same time, it's like you said, right? It's been reused and resold as different systems, when in reality, it's a lot of it that is very efficient comes from the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man. This is how it happened. This is how, and it's, and
Fascinating, man.
yeah, and we start to see this. And then you start, and there's actually an industry of athletes who were adopting Soviet training methods that no one was really paying attention to, but it was attracting a lot of eyes. Actually, baseball was big in development in the United States, but what was even bigger was boxing, where there was a lot of techniques you see in American boxing. Like, I was looking at old footage, 1970s film footage, 1960s, 1980s film footage. They're doing very similar training modalities that the Soviet Union was doing. And I was thinking, like, how is this possible? Like, are these guys from the Bronx talking to Dr. Yessis? Like, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm thinking is that like, and you see this in like these Soviet documentaries, when you hear the coaches interview, you hear the players, when they get out of the country a little bit to compete, and they get a few moments away from the KGB, from spying on them. Like, you go to a boxing tournament, everyone has a competition, it's over, right? So usually all the athletes are in a hotel, or in the local scene, in the local town. The competition's over. Yeah. So they're still human beings. They're probably talking with the Americans.
Having conversations. Yes, of course.
Conversations. What are they doing? Especially because when you fight and you compete against each other, especially in fighting amongst males will find a common ground after a fight. It's so relevant amongst male behavior. Usually when you see little kids fight on the playground, I would tell them, let them fight. They'll be best friends when it's over. Mm-hmm. When you see, like, in boxing or MMA, whenever they have like a good hard fight, usually they just want to hug each other and show respect.
It's because they sit in the same boat. Yesterday I watched a documentary of a Nigerian boxer. Forgot his name. He was so massive. He could have been the next Mike Tyson, but something went off. And he had this slugfest with David Tua, who's also a monster of a heavyweight. And these guys were slugging it out for 12 rounds. And at the end, they were like, hey, man. Wow. It's like, wow. And that's it, right? It's this finding this. And fighting is one thing. I think it just happens in general when you find common ground with somebody. For example, running the YouTube game, or being a coach, or running a business, and then you talk to somebody who's doing the same. You assimilate. You find common ground, and you can empathize. So of course this must have happened between these athletes. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's kind of like, that's my hypothesis why boxing never got into the bodybuilding scene, never got huge in the weightlifting scene. They were usually more into just skill work, medicine balls, jump ropes.
You're right.
Doing things that were a little bit more on the Soviet side of training styles. I think they were sharing information slowly but surely. So, and of course, fighting high consequence sport, if you lose, you can get hurt really bad. So you need good results. So they're probably very sensitive to what delivered good results in their sport. They were highly sensitive to it. Unlike, say, not saying football's not hard, but I definitely feel like a blood sport of boxing has a different sort of difficulty than, say, American football. So you can get away with a lot with, say, football or basketball, because you lose a game, it's okay. You lose a boxing match, you gotta go to the hospital. Big deal. Mm-hmm. So as the Soviet Union's falling apart, athletes are leaving the country left and right. Some are staying, a lot are going. Coaches leaving. A lot of them, and that's where you kind of see like this big boom of sports science in the West, because now all these coaches and these experts need to find a way to make money. Exactly. And a lot of foreigners go to the United States, not because it's the best nation in the world, but because there's money to be made here. There's a lot of money to be made in the US. So people go in, try to cash in on their skills. So now we start to get into Dr. Yessis and Dr. Yuri are in the West sharing information, sharing knowledge. And now we're going to switch timelines. Now we're going to go to the American timeline. where you come across Marv Marinovich, who was the first strength and conditioning coach for the NFL. He's the one that developed the methodology of determining good athletes and good athletic training that all professional organizations use today. And he sought out Dr. Yuri and Dr. Yeses to learn these Soviet principles and the Soviet training. And also West Barbell guy, Louis Simmons.
Yeah.
This is around the same time he started to learn it, because the information is now out. It's no longer secretive. The Berlin Wall fell.
And you know what's
all out now.
You know, this is such a fascinating process in me piecing the puzzle together, or piecing the pieces of the puzzle together, is as I am reading this material from Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky, as I'm having this conversation with Dr. Yeses, as I'm buying his books, and I read 3 of his books, I think I bought 6 of them, and now I'm on my 4th book, and I'm really digging in, and slowly stuff like this comes to mind. I'm like, excuse me, this guy from Westside Barbell, he's using explosive training, explosive technique. He's talking about speed strength. Louis Simmons. So in my journey, I'm checking out Louis Simmons' material. Come to find out, he's referencing Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky. And a couple of days ago, I read an article about weightlifting, and interestingly, how there are so many such a high injury rate in the NBA and the NFL, in the ACL or in the knee area, just the lower extremities in the shank. And the guy who's talking about it, he's putting up this stark contrast between weightlifting, these guys who catch 250% of their body weight with their shank, with the knees going over the toes, no problems, nothing whatsoever, but the NBA and NFL players get hurt all along the way. And come to find out, this guy is quoting again Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky. So what I'm trying to say is, as I am digging deeper into this journey, you see that it's gotten common. It's all adding up. Yeah.
Adding exactly. Up. I know, dude. This is. I'm telling you, this is so, like, this is one of the. This needs to be a documentary. This is like when people thought fat was bad for you, and you know, like, this is one of these moments. It's gonna happen. Like, what we're doing right now is a part of the process. So, so that's a perfect segue. We can go into our next idea, where you go into Marv Marinovich, learning from Dr. Yeses, learning from Dr. Yuri, taking these Eastern blocks of sports performance training and trying to evolve them further. And he used that to help build the NFL in the United States, the superconductor sports machine that is the NFL. And when do you guys, what's your number one sport in
soccer?
Soccer. Okay.
Yeah.
So say if you're going to be recruited to go to a university for soccer, there's certain drills and methodologies they'll use to try to measure you. In the United States, they call them combines. I don't know if they call them there. So these methodologies of combines were all developed by Marv Marinovich. Like, he developed these concepts, and everyone took these philosophies and these concepts and applied it to their own sport. But he's the one that originally started this sort of thing. And taking what he learned from the Soviet Union, Dr. Yuri and Dr. Yeses, and then taking what he learned from the physical therapy department of the United States, which is really growing in the 70s and 80s. And he started to take all these concepts and push them together, and he created nervous system training. Now, this is a system because, for one, like, Dr. Yeses and Dr. Yuri, they didn't have it doesn't appear that they had the grounds to create like a very large productive business out of their knowledge. Because remember, we're in the United States now. You know, if you have a lot of knowledge but you don't know how to put it together for a business, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay in the books. Exactly. Marv was able to find a way to turn this into a business with professional sports. And so, funded by the Oakland Raiders, he became the first strength and conditioning coach in 1969. And they were having him work not as a strength coach, but as a talent scout to try to recruit more players. And so he tried to think of, okay, as he's, let me start. So as he's going along, looking for these high-level prospects, traveling the country, getting funded by the NFL, so he had the resources to do it, he started to notice that the best genetic recruits, the ones with the best potential, they all have similarities with their physiology. And he started to create a very specific process on how to test the body, test the shoulders, test the feet, test the strength of the hips, the flexibility, all that. And you realize the best athletes who did the best on the field, they all had similar patterns and similar scores on their athletic assessments. And usually the guys who had the best numbers in the weight room had the highest amount of injuries and the lowest numbers on the field. He started to notice this pattern over how years have gone by. And so he kind of perfected his training methodology, took all these philosophies and principles and kept testing them in the NFL until he kind of landed on what he feels, or not what he feels, on what shows the highest level of sports performance results with his nervous system training. Now, Marv Marinovich has a son, Todd Marinovich, in the 80s. And so Marv Marinovich decides to take a step away from the NFL, take a step away from everything else, and he decides to do the craziest experiment I've ever heard of a dad doing ever, where he asks himself, what can you get if you take a human and create the perfect training situation and environment from birth to adulthood? Can you make the perfect athlete? And he decided to do that with his son, Todd Marinovich. There's a great documentary where it kind of covers this whole thing called the Marinovich Project, where Marv would, from birth, with his son, would have him doing like when he's in the cradle, have stretching out his hamstrings to make sure he has good range of motion. Would make him crawl hundreds of yards on the football field to try to build up his strength. Try to make him walk early. Would do things like he would just find different ways to physically challenge his baby boy as much as possible. And this went on through his whole life. So a lot of the training methods that are pretty common, like eating really healthy, like balance training, like a lot of the lifestyle that you see pretty common in athletes today, a lot of this was prototyped into Todd Marinovich during the 80s. And so Marv perfects his training system through his son, because now he has this one body where he can get as much data as possible and see what works, what doesn't work. And he can kind of timeline the athletic development process of like a human being through his son. And so then that solidifies his nervous system training. Now, his son, Todd Marinovich, was a phenomenal football player. I mean, he went to private, like in the United States, we have private schools just for sports, where only the best of the best are allowed to go to this school to play sports. And they're in a grooming process to try to become a professional athlete. And Todd Marinovich was the starting quarterback of, I think, Capistrano University in California as a freshman in high school. I think he was 14, and he was the starting quarterback of like 17 and 18-year-old American football teams. Already playing
with the older boys.
Yeah, he was so advanced. Now, Todd was not big and strong and muscular. He was athletic. That's the key difference. That's what a lot of Americans are mistaking right now, where they think big muscles and good aesthetic physique equals athleticism.
We take too much from the bodybuilding world. Way too much. Yeah. But one question, Quintin. Now, if let's revisit this timeline quickly. So we have the Soviet Union crumbling. We have the knowledge spreading, mostly, or let's say like a big part of it, into the U.S. We have a Marv Marinovich designing a system that is recognized in one of the in a multi-million or billion-dollar business in the United States, in the NFL. We have all this happening. He does this crazy prototype program with his son. Why is it still the case then that years later, we are still battling against this idea that being the strongest in the weight room is not the key to athletic success. Genetic potential makes only about, I'm reading this in the book right now from Dr. Yeses. He says, depending on the sport, he says genetics only count in extreme sports like high endurance or high speed, where you have the muscle fiber distribution. I get that. But he said mostly in between, and that's team sports, it's 30% genetics and 70% the proper work done to the athlete. Right. So why is it still then such a mystery? And why are we still battling these ideas that, bro, you don't have to look like a physique model. You have to do your skill work. You have to have a I've heard this the first time from Dr. Yeses. You have to have a biomechanist check out your form and function as you are doing your sport-specific training and sport-specific skill, and then the biomechanist is going to tell you what's wrong. That's what you have to fix, and then we have to do sport-specific exercises, SPP exercises, to bring you to the next level. Why is this still so uncommon?
So, this is why. It's two factors. It's two factors. One, it's because of the universities and their system of developing of athletes. And number two, it's because of the quality of coaching in the United States currently. So I don't know if this is a thing, but I do know in Russia and Ukraine, you can get a college degree, a master's degree in coaching. You can get a master of sports degree. I don't know if they do it in your country, but the United States, that's not a thing.
Yeah, you can do, and I wish I did this. You can become a sports scientist in that regard. Sportwissenschaft, it's called. And that's some kind of a bachelor's degree. But I'm not sure whether that qualifies you as a coach, because you see trainers not really rocking that title. But I'm not I'm not that big in that regard. But it is right. a way of getting education. Yeah.
Yeah, like I do know, I'm pretty positive, like say in countries like Germany and the UK, I think you can go to college for soccer coaching. I believe that is a thing. I do know it is a thing in Russia where you can get a degree in coaching a very specific sport. Like Khabib Nurmagomedov, his dad had a degree in exercise science and Sambo Master of Sport Coaching.
Interesting.
Sambo.
Yeah, the right. Martial art, right? The fighting. Yeah.
So but in the United States, that's not really considered it's not really considered a educational skill set. So what happened is that because of the starting philosophy of the United States, where it was mostly geared towards aerobic health, that the medical system is creating the fundamental philosophy of sports sciences in the West, the medical system, because it's rooted in physical fitness preparation, not sports-specific preparation. It's rooted in the physical fitness department. So everything derives from that. So everything when it comes to training athletes in the West today revolves around fitness. Well, it's slowly changing, but for a very long time, it's revolved under fitness doctrine, medical fitness doctrine. In Russia, it was strictly sports performance doctrine. Like, who cares about your health? You need your heart rate to go 220. Remember? They didn't care about your health.
Yeah.
So, but in the United States, everyone's an individual. Everyone has their own rights. Everyone has their own motivation. So it creates a situation where the health of the athlete comes first instead of the performance of the athlete. Because training at high levels, such as the Soviet hockey team did, that is not healthy for you. That is detrimental to your health. That could have very negative consequences for you in the long run. It breaks your body down, breaks your joints down. It can lead to cardiovascular disease when you're older. So because of that, and on top of the coaching, now I just watched this video on Dr. Yeses. He explained this. So I'm going to try to regurgitate this as best I can. Dr. Yeses made a video on the current state of sports performance science in the universities today. A big part of it is to become an athlete in the universities. There's a whole freaking natural selection process that takes place before the university will even know who you are.
Yeah.
So why would the universities try to work harder when they already get the best of the best.
Yes.
Right off the bat.
Yes.
So what they see and what they're dealing with skewed numbers. These are already genetic freaks. These are already mentally driven people. They're already outliers. What happened to the other kids? What happened to the other 90 bodies? Where did they go? They didn't make it. Why? Who cares? That's what happens. Who cares?
I'm just reading this in the book. I have to interject because I'm just reading exactly this statement in his book that's called Build a Better Athlete, How to Fix American Sports. That's the book that I'm reading. And he says exactly this. He says that in the selection process, they are already looking for the high performer. They're not looking for potential.
Exactly. Because we have so many kids.
Yeah. Just get the best. Who cares about the rest, man? And you're not incentivized in that regard to create a system to get the best out of what you have.
Exactly. If you're in a country like you're in Switzerland, right?
Yeah.
So Switzerland has a much lower population than the United States.
Yeah.
So in your culture, your systems, your government, they're probably looking at, okay, like the Americans have like 50 kids. We only got 10 kids. Mm-hmm. We got to make all our kids better. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We don't have the room or the opportunity to just let kids fall by the wayside.
Yeah, completely different.
So then, so that's why the sports sciences in Europe are so much further ahead than the United States, because in order to compete, you have to get your common denominator better. In the United States, if you got a bunch of low-level kids, but you got 3 superstars, who cares? Mm-hmm. Like, these superstars are going to make you better, and it creates a situation where American coaches hope for good players. Professional sports in America hopes that the best will show up, because eventually they will show up. Mm-hmm. But that seems so ass backwards to me, because why would you only want 5 elite athletes? Why would you only want 5 when we could have 30? Now sports gets better. Now we have performances, and we can start breaking more records.
Yeah, competition gets better. Yeah, you're right.
It makes more money. So we're kind of at a battle right now with it, and it's a perfectly natural thing to take place, because this is a form of natural selection in Western sports right now. But a huge part of it is the universities, and the other side of the coin is the standard. And I got to be very careful, because I work with a lot of coaches in the United States. And I say this with all respect, but the reality is that the barrier of entry to become a sports coach in the United States is nothing. Anyone can do it. We rely, especially on the youth level, we rely on a volunteer system. Mm-hmm. It's mostly parents, and it's mostly parents who just played the game. Playing a sport and coaching a sport and teaching the techniques of the sport are 2 totally different worlds. Yeah. They're similar, but they're very different. Just because you're a good player does not make you a good coach. Just because you're really good with kettlebells and you know a lot of good techniques does not mean you can run a good class.
Exactly. It's 2 different things. And what's so fascinating about this is that you have another statement from Dr. Yesses comes to mind. He says, a lot of the time we think, I'm just rephrasing now, many times we think that the winning team who's on a winning streak has the best coach, when in reality, it's not the coach. He just has the best athletes.
Yeah.
In one team.
Yeah. They can afford the best athletes. A lot of the times in the United States, it comes down to money. Higher level clubs, higher level athletes cost more money to get in.
Yeah, and that's the same situation in soccer. It's here in Europe. You have Italian teams, you have Spanish teams. The Spanish and the Italian and the German league and the English, the UK, are the highest leagues, so to speak. But you have so many foreigners playing in the leagues, and you see it always in the World Cup, because then you only have United Kingdom. But funny thing is, then you have foreigners who are bought in to become English or to become French or to become Spanish, because, hey man, we need you. Here you go. He got the ID. You're now official Spanish. Let's go. Let's rock. So it's fascinating to see. You have such a huge part of foreigners in the team, and the money that is spent on these athletes is wild. You have in Europe, you have a lot of sheikhs from Dubai, from just the Arabic world, spending money like crazy because it's their fair time. How do you call it? The spare time.
Yeah,
it's their spare time. So they spend millions buying these athletes together. So of course you got the whole of Europe, or the whole of the world, and then you have the talent scouts looking for the best guys from Nigeria, from Russia, from everywhere, from Brazil, from everywhere, just to get these talent scouts. Who it's the same thing in soccer. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but since it's such a huge sport played all around the world, you essentially look all around the world for talent. I mean, in the United States, I think it's mostly, when it comes to the NFL, it's mostly Americans, right, who play the sport?
Mostly Americans, yeah.
Mostly Americans. But here, you have foreigners from the whole world coming together. Mm-hmm. Because the money buys the athlete. So I'm not that sure if the training system is that developed here in Europe, because you have the same situation. Buy in the athletes, and then you have the best team. There you go.
Yeah. And but not the everyday person really understands how this all works. Mm. You just see the game and you see the jersey and you're like, oh, they must have been responsible for that. Mm-hmm. You know, because at the end of the time, it's just entertainment. So not everyone's really thinking about this very much. And a lot of these consumers are also athletes and coaches. They're not really thinking about it too much, you know, and a lot of times. So in the United States, if you have a big body of kids, you got like 5 outliers and the rest of the kids struggle. So let's create a coaching philosophy and a game philosophy around these 5 players. And the other kids are kind of just fodder.
You support them. The other kids are just supporting the stars. Yeah. Yeah.
But when it comes to skill work, biomechanics, and training techniques, that's where the United States really falls far behind. So when you get to the universities, you have the volunteer coaching system of a bunch of dads who are just trying their best. And a lot of these guys are really trying their best.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's like they're working full-time jobs.
Yeah,
you know, it's like they're not full-time coaches. They're just trying to learn some stuff on the side from YouTube to help their son play some ball.
Exactly.
You know, and then
can't blame him. Can't blame him.
Yeah, it just is what it is. It's how it's kind of there's no incentive. There's no money in coaching in the United States. Not unless you're part of like these huge organizations, like these elite level organizations, and it can be very difficult to develop that. So you don't need to make every kid better. You just need to hope that some good kids will show up, revolve the whole strategy of the team around these good kids. Then these good kids eventually get more playing time, they develop faster, and they eventually get to the point where they become freaks, and the university is like, hey, I like the way you play. I like your numbers. Come to University of Michigan. Come to Michigan State. Come to University of Alabama. Let's see what you got. But they already have had advantages their whole developmental process, which makes them, because genetics isn't everything. It's only 30%. But if you get these kids more reps, more playing time, more psychological affirmation, because they are the best, you know, so they're running, these kids are running on higher serotonin levels, higher dopamine levels, higher oxytocin. They're getting more victories, more opportunities. That doesn't seem a lot in one game, but how many games are being played in an athlete's lifetime? It compounds and compounds and compounds. And then, you get a situation where over a couple decades, now you have this freak who can play in the MLB at 18. Was he born that way? Well, he was also in a system where it kind of favors and cultivates the genetic freaks, and they get all the best treatment, all the best opportunities. And the kids who are average, who could become these freaks too with proper training, they never get as much opportunity, not as many reps, you know, not as much playing time.
And I think at the same time, even if we shift the focus away from, I mean, that's a bad thing, you know, having potential that is lost. That's a bad thing in its own right. But even if we shift the focus a little bit, okay, we have these genetic freaks, and it just coincides with the book that I'm reading. It's so cool. Dr. Yessis says, yes, you have the genetic freaks, but you can still make them even better.
Right.
Because he said he never met an athlete who couldn't improve. But he said the big problem, like you're saying now, is we're not focused on skill work. The only thing that we're focusing on is, and that's what I thought too, just let them play the game. They'll get better. Just let them play the game. Right. Let them play the game. And while it is important to be always exposed to your sport-specific movements, you have to have somebody who analyzes the movement. I mean, and they have the money, right? These teams have the money. So you'd have to have a biomechanist sitting there looking at the top 5 and say, that's a wrong step. That's what he's doing wrong. I see his hip is not working right. Let's get these guys in. You got to change your techniques, man. Yeah, but I'm the best. Doesn't matter. It's still bad. Yeah. So that's the kind of mentality that you have to be equipped with, and then you bring them up and you do a lot of skill work. I mean, I see the same thing. It's funny, but it's I think a great analogy. Since 2019, in June 2019, Steve Cotter, who's one of the big names in the kettlebell world, I flew him in to Switzerland. He certified Angie and me. Angie's my partner. We're doing this business together. So after this moment, from 2019 onwards, I have done probably, I don't know, thousands and thousands of reps of the swing, the clean and press, the snatch with kettlebells. Just immensely. I really did. That's the only thing that I did, almost.
Like a part of you now.
Yeah, it's almost part of me now. But at the same time, I did this probably unconsciously, or I wasn't aware of it. I looked at the professionals and looked at the movement of the hips, the knees, the toes, the arms, and I really dissected the movement. I let it play in super slow motion, dissected the individual phases of the exercise, and then I saw, okay, that's where I'm lacking. When I'm falling into the second dip, I don't extend my arms at the same time. My arms are still lagging behind. That's what I'm doing wrong, right? So that's how I got better. And then when I see other trainers or other coaches or even other YouTubers do their stuff, I'm like, that's sloppy technique, man. And I'm not even trying to be mad at them. It's still good. But it's not that level, not the perfection that I'm striving for. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's just because I'm so exposed to it and I'm analyzing every bit of it. That's why I'm getting better. And then I put in the work. And that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing with the athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating, man.
And you realize, like, every athlete I've ever worked with, every human body has imperfections. There's like a bunch, like, there's weaknesses all over the place, and you probably don't even realize it. Like, you could have weaknesses in your chest, weaknesses in your shoulder blades, weaknesses in your feet, your toes, your hips, and even some of the highest level athletes. I mean, I worked with professional athletes before. We still find areas of the body that aren't working right, which is reducing their ability to generate speed and force, which is the physical principle of how all sports run. Force, mass times acceleration, and that's called rate of force development. All sports are governed by this philosophy. All sports add speed to some point. So a part of the reason why we're seeing fitness methods being very implemented into training today, while you're not seeing a lot of these other methods, such as like the nervous system training that I utilize, seeing all that much, is the fitness philosophy that the university has established, right? So it already has mistakes in its foundation of thinking, of how the philosophy teaches people to look at things, right?
Exactly.
And then you have another thing that no one thinks about. your feet. Your feet are the strongest limb on your whole body. It is the only limb where just one of them, your ankle, can push your whole body weight up in the air in like less than a second. Just boom, right up on your tippy toe. No problem. No problem. It's not even that hard. No other limb on your body can create that much leverage. So if you look at the best of the best athletes, when you do this athletic assessment that Mark Marinovich established, where you test their foot strength, you test the flexibility of their ankles, their hamstrings, their hips, their spine, and you feel where these differences are. The best athletes have the strongest feet. Like, it never fails. It never fails. They have the strongest feet because it's your first point of contact on the ground. Mm-hmm. If there's weaknesses in your feet, the rest of your body has to create additional strength and leverage to create the rate of force development. Wow. Right? And it has to be fast. Like those box jumps, that stretch shortening cycle has to be 0.15 if you want to be elite. If you're slower than 0.15, that's the difference between blocking the soccer ball or just missing it off your fingertips. It's that close. So so no weakness can be tolerated if you want to be the best. Everything has to be elite, or you're not going to be able to compete and you get cut and you don't achieve your goals. But it's the foot strength. It's the foot strength. I'm telling you, it's the foot strength is what makes the difference in training philosophy. Fitness training philosophy, you never see the feet. Wow. Everyone's got freaking sneakers on.
Yeah.
It's not in our psyche. Yeah. It's not what we see. Because remember, like, universities and studies do not dictate reality. Not all the time. Mm-hmm. It helps us extrapolate truth, and so we have references to know where measurements are. But let's think about when, okay, let's create a scenario, right? I'm fresh out of the best university in the United States or Switzerland or whatever, right? I got my exercise science degree. I got my physiology degree, you know, and I'm about to train my first client, right? I did all this stuff. I'm not a licensed practitioner, you know, I'm not a physical therapist. So I have to go out and I got to sell, right? Yeah. Yeah. This is what happens on the ground level. It doesn't happen in theory when the university professors are talking about whatever they're talking about. Because there's, when you're in the streets, you know, you can't always rely on the professor.
It's life or death, man. It's life or death in these streets. Yes,
so exactly. You got to sell. You got to get these athletes. You got to call them, and it's hard to sell, dude. It is not easy to sell service, especially health service.
Exactly, man.
You know, you gotta make phone calls. You gotta have like your shirt with your logo on it. You gotta, you know, have space. You gotta pay for that space. You gotta have your equipment. You gotta pay for the equipment, or at least do something. And then
some marketing. It's
marketing, flyers, all that, videos. And so you finally get your first client, right? I got my first 13-year-old kid who's a soccer player. Okay, yes, here we go. I'm starting my dream. I'm starting my career as a strength and conditioning coach. All right. So when the session starts, you want to see, okay, how can we make improvements? What can we do? Well, athletic assessments aren't always very mainstream. They're really not. A lot of trainers that I talk to, a lot of sports coaches, athletic trainers, and a lot of parents that I talk to when it comes to like running my business, none of them go through evaluations or assessments. They kind of show up. They maybe do some drills. The coaches see how they handle, or maybe they have like a scrimmage, and they'll see who's playing good. You, and you. You're on the team. That's usually how it goes. Or when you're with a trainer and you got your first client, you might have some sort of way to assess things, but you're not seeing the most important thing with your eyes. That's their feet. So you develop a philosophy of trying to fix this athlete from the hips down, not from the feet up. It's completely backwards. It's completely the philosophical thought process of training athletes in the United States is backwards right now. Actually, not just the United States, the whole world, because they're all wearing these freaking shoes. When you take the shoes off, and I know you do some kettlebell workouts on barefoot, it feels different.
It's different, and it just the shoe limits you. It limits the space, how your toes are connecting with the floor, and especially if you have these thick cushion sneakers, your proprioception is off. And
it's all off.
And what you're saying makes so much sense. It's so funny that it coincides with this great article that I read a couple of days ago, and I did a video about it. And it's an article from a guy who's called Andrew Bud Charniga, and he's also from the former Soviet Union in the weightlifting world. And it's so interesting because he talks about the process, what is happening from the knee downwards to the ankle. And because it's this strange myth that is still going around the world that has some merit to it, but about this knee not going past the toes. So I was studying this great article, and he was talking about the tibialis anterior, this muscle that you have right in front of the shin, which is a fascinating aspect that he says. You know what's funny about the tibialis anterior? In the textbooks, and you mentioned about the university guy, you have to complete your story after I'm done with this, but he also says in another article, he says one of the most important commodities to get is hands-on training with real people in the business world, because that's way more worth than your education that you got while you were at university, right? So he says the textbooks do not classify the tibialis anterior as a knee flexor. They just say it moves the ankle. But funny thing, what happens when you are dipping, for example, so that's from weightlifting and from kettlebells as well. Dipping is when you push your knees forward over your toes with the hip extended, kettlebell in the rack or barbell in the rack. And as you are dipping forward, you are loading the biggest spring of the human body, the Achilles tendon. So as you are shifting the knees forward, what is causing this shift of your shins? The tibialis anterior. What happens when you shift the shins forward? Your knees start flexing.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating article. And he talks about how, like I mentioned earlier, how people are suffering, especially professional players, are suffering from these shank injuries in the ankles, in the knees, everywhere. Then they start taping the athlete's foot. Then they have three
its own problems.
Yeah, and it creates its own problems. Then they do 3D scans on the foot and everything, and they think it's the field, it's the grass, it's whatever it is. Everything else is the problem, but not this huge misconception that these athletes are forced to train thinking that the knee is not supposed to go past the toes. And he says if you are ignoring this natural movement pattern, there will be consequences in your ankle.
Yeah.
That's where yeah.
And it's not just that. You're trying to get a biomechanical pattern to take place when you're binding the limb that needs to slide well in the tissue.
Yeah.
In a can I swear? I'm sorry.
Can I swear?
And these
Go
goddamn
ahead,
shoes.
Yes.
Like these shoes, like if you think about it, it's so unnatural to have a shoe on. Like shoes are effective when you have to do work outside and you have to produce something. When you need a group of men to go from one country to the other country to conduct war, shoes help. But when it comes to having the body move as best as possible, and I see this with so many athletes, it's a huge thing where you'll have like the tibialis anterior will be overdeveloped, creating restrictions in the ankle, and the agonist, like if the tibialis flexes, the muscle that lengthens is the Achilles. And now your Achilles tendon can't lengthen to full potential. What is that going to do?
Exactly.
Reduce force. Reduce
or snap
speed,
it in half. Yeah.
Snap it in half.
Exactly.
And a lot of this comes from when I take off my when I tell my athletes, like, listen, when you do my program, we do everything barefoot. A lot of them like freak out. It is such a we are so weird about our feet to a psychological, emotional context. Like most people like try, if you ever try getting your clients to take their shoes off and they're like, oh, like it kind of makes them feel uncomfortable. It's like everyone's used to covering their feet.
Yeah.
But if you go to like certain nations, like I like to use Thailand as an example with their Muay Thai fighters, like Muay Thai fighters in Thailand, they fight barefoot. So all their training is barefoot. If you look at their feet, or if you look at people who exist in more third world countries where shoes aren't quite as available, their feet look like hands. Like they're very tough. The toes can open up. If you look at it, if you look at modern people's feet, they're very like soft and narrow and binded
crammed
down
together. Yeah.
Now
Exactly.
every single toe and every single part of the foot controls a muscle in the hips and spine. Every single part. Like your glute minimus controlled by the pinky toe. Your glute medius is controlled by the second toe, the pinky toe, and the outside of the foot. The big toe stimulates the Achilles tendon and the glute max. If all those have dysfunctions, guess what? Everything else is going to be dysfunctional going upwards, creating less force, less acceleration, more injury, because you have flaws in your biomechanics, and over time, that's going to break your tendons down. That's going to break your joints down because it's not optimal. It's not in equilibrium. That's what Marv Marinovich discovered. He realized that weightlifting, heavy conventional weightlifting, breaks down and destroys the equilibrium of the feet and of the knees and of the joints, because now the agonist approach to agonist muscles, they don't move properly. It breaks down equilibrium. So you get situations where the feet aren't working good. The anterior tib might be overdeveloped. You have weaknesses in this area. So the rest of the leg has to overcompensate to try to keep up and compete with the demand. And now you start adding heavy weightlifting techniques and modalities where it like overdevelops the quads, underdevelops the hamstring, maybe underdevelops the calf. Next thing you know, if you plant weird under speed, the joint has instability to it.
Exactly.
And next thing you know, an injury occurs.
It's this imbalanced training approach that we're not just in the athletic world. I'm not as familiar in the athletic world. I'm more familiar with the GPP world, right, where normal people reside. But it's the same thing. It's people are highly underdeveloped and there's imbalance because you're just doing one thing. Or, for example, when we train in our gym, we do 99% of it is standing. We train standing. We don't sit down. We don't lay on the floor. I'm not saying that's bad, but for most people, it's just you have to stand, right? Because you're coming from an office desk job. So now I want you to stand and work. And then you know what happens? It's a funny thing. That's always happens when you work with people throughout our kettlebell experience teaching kettlebells, is they have muscle soreness in the foot, right? Down here. This is where they feel it. It's fascinating. And let me just pivot a little bit further, because last time you mentioned something, and I have a couple of more minutes and then we have to close. Last time you mentioned something about these MMA fighters, Georges Saint-Pierre, what's his GSP, right?
GSP, yeah.
Right. So you mentioned that some of these guys adopted some of these training techniques. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, I have notes on this. Okay, so Marv Marinovich works with this one football player named Troy Polamalu. He does his nervous system training, and it's on my YouTube channel. Like, you can see this training method kind of take place. And Troy Polamalu, he's like the best football player to ever live defensively. He's like he's the man. Everyone knows Troy. Everyone loves Troy. His performances were out of this world. He just exclusively did nervous system training with Marv. Now, Marv was working at his facility, and then for some reason, I don't know why, he decided to leave his facility that he had established and just go work exclusively with this MMA fighter named BJ Penn. Now, BJ Penn almost beat Georges St-Pierre. BJ Penn is considered one of the best lightweight UFC world champions to ever live. And he exclusively trained with Marv Marinovich for UFC 101 in the year 2009, doing this nervous system training. BJ Penn was known for being a great athlete, being a great fighter, but his conditioning and his training levels were never really up to par. He was kind of lazy, and it showed in his fighting. He would get tired. He couldn't finish guys. So there was an obvious performance deficit that he had, keeping him from being like one of the great guys. And that's why he lost against Georges St-Pierre. Georges St-Pierre had a better cardio tank better athletic abilities and was able to outperform BJ. After BJ lost to GSP, he said, all right, I got to fix this. He sought out Mark Marinovich, and Mark Marinovich exclusively worked with BJ Penn, and he had the two best performances I've ever seen out of a UFC fighter, at least at the time. Like, because I was a huge BJ Penn fan, and I would watch every single fight. I would watch his YouTube vlogs. Like, I was such a fanboy back in these days. And when I saw BJ Penn do these two fights, like he moved like I've never seen him move before. His speed, his ferocity, his conditioning, his cardio was like what the hell is this? Like, it's like this new BJ. And so when I was watching a documentary on his training methods, he's doing all these crazy ass training methods that I've never seen before. Balancing on boards with his feet, doing these different movements with hand weights, throwing up these plyometric machines, becoming more explosive. And
Yuri style.
Yeah, he started doing Soviet training methods, but they were refined and perfected with Mark Marinovich. And now all of a sudden, BJ was the most dominant fighter ever. Like he split this one guy, Diego Sanchez, who fought against him. He kicked him in the head and split his head so deep you could see his skull through the gap. It was horrendous. I could not believe. And I was a fighter at the time, and I'm like, where did this training come from? I was like, I need to learn this. Like this, he was like, all of a sudden, BJ, who was great, is now phenomenal. So as time went on, George St. Pierre came across his training too, because he tore his knee. He tore his ACL, and he needed someone who was credible that knew how to get him back to sport. And that's when George St. Pierre ran into one of Marv Marinovich's other disciples, Gary, for Sports Science Lab. Gary trained George St. Pierre to get his knee back together, and he trained Dominic Cruz to get his knee back together, utilizing this nervous system training, and was able to deliver results that were able to get him back into MMA faster than what's like medically possible. So that's how they came across it, but it's very, very exclusive training. There's not a lot of guys who know how to do this. There's only like 10 of us. There's only honestly like 4 of us who are really serious about it. So a lot of this training method, a lot of this nervous system training is very exclusive. And that's why I'm kind of doing this, because to be totally honest, I'm trying to make this more mainstream, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of training methods that I think are more detrimental to these kids than what we think is going on. And if we could if the best of the best athletes can become better, but we don't know how to make them better, that means that there's so much potential on performance we're missing out on. Like, where would the human race be instead of 5 pros coming out of Michigan if we can make 30 professionals come out of Michigan? Like, what kind of environment does that create in the human race? Like, we don't know. But that's what I think about.
Wow. And imagine if you get these pros together with these refined techniques, and you are able to establish this hive mind mentality, that's the thing that really stood out to me in this documentary. How these guys can play together blindly. And I know MMA it's a one person sport, so it's not a team sport. But even in MMA, I think it is if you can improve, and the crazy thing is that it seems to be still kind of like under the radar.
Yes, it is.
This type of training idea that let's focus a little bit more on skills. Let's focus on how the nerve muscle system interacts. Let's focus less on this fitness type aesthetic bodybuilding stuff. Get away from it and focus on what's really relevant. I think that was one of the red pills that I swallowed when I was working in this field of business that I'm working in, because I realized at the end of the day, the regular Joe, the regular Jane, the regular people, they don't care at all about aesthetics. And I have to be more exact, especially people who are a little bit older, people who will pay you because they need to get their pain in check.
Right. The
longevity becomes way more important. Of course, aesthetics still plays a role, but if you stick with it, aesthetics takes care of itself. But I used to think that everybody wants to be this bodybuilding type look, or wants it, right? And so and that's another situation that I'm realizing is like, why are these gym chains, why is the traditional gym pushing a bodybuilding type style philosophy with machines? I don't get it. Yes, I get it from an economic perspective, but hey, it doesn't really work that well. I'm not saying machines don't work. Of course they work. But people need to stand most of the time. It's just some things that don't add up. And in the athletic world, it's the same. Even though you have these systems that clearly point towards a direction that, hey, this is how you get people better. But we're kind of like lazy. We don't have the incentive, right? It's like, hey, who cares? Let's pick the best ones and go.
Yeah. Here's the interesting thing that happens. Like, okay, so from my experience, trying to use this unconventional form of sports performance training, and I also do it with fitness. Like, I incorporate this nervous system training with my fitness clients. Like, I run an adult fitness group, and it translates really well. People need to be sold to accept it. Yeah. You need to sell it, and it will never change. That will never change. You have to create a positive emotional context around what they're putting their money towards. Because at the end of the day, they're giving you the money, and they want to. And like you said, people are kind of lazy. They have their own problems. They're paying attention to their kids. They're worried about their own skill set in their own workplace. They're not really worried about, they're just looking for a solution that they feel good about. They're not looking to change the state of human training in the world. Yeah. Exactly. They're just looking for, they want a good sweat, they want an adrenaline rush, and they want to know that they're not going to die of a heart attack.
Exactly.
And they want to get their chronic pain down. Yeah. So when I'm talking to like parents, kids, when I'm trying to get them into my program, a lot of them are resistant. They're unsure about it. It's very unusual. It's very unconventional. They don't see it on ESPN. They don't see it when they're watching the documentaries.
It's not on display. Students. Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah.
They're being sold something else. So that's what they're expecting. And then when they do the program, they do take on the program, they start training these unconventional parts of the body, doing the athletic assessments, doing the plyometrics, the nervous system training, all this stuff, and they start getting results that are just beyond comprehension. They become subscribed. Now, here's another weird thing that happens too. As they become subscribed, they get results, they get better over and over again. They start becoming the most elite of the elite athletes. A lot of the times they'll just stop training with me. Like it doesn't, like I've had kids, here's some weird example. I've had kids that I've trained since they were like 14 to 18, developed them for years, working very specifically, like 3 to 4 times a week, 2-hour training sessions, like spending a lot of times with these people. And we get them in a big university, like a Division I university, right? The athlete goes to the university, adopts their training method, never comes back.
So they're switching their training regime for a lesser one.
They're sold on the university because
they're sold on the prestige, on the idea, and of course now these methodologies are in place, and I can hear the trainers, or I can hear how they talk about somebody who's independent, like, yeah, come on, man, we do the real stuff here, right? It's kind of like this idea that just because you have prestige and because you are a elite university or an elite club or whatever, that your systems are the ones that work, when in fact, and that's another great sentence that comes to mind as I'm reading this book from Dr. Yessis. And the funny thing is, most of the books that I've read from Dr. Yessis, when you open up the books and you skim through it, you see almost all pages are red. It's like I'm underlining so much stuff because it's so valuable. And one thing that he says is, for example, you expect a world-class athlete to be to execute the perfect skill, right? So because they're world class. But he says that's far from the truth, because when you ask them how they execute the skill, and he puts this great example between a Soviet high jumper, I think it's high jumping, right? Where you are, right? So he has this stark contrast where this one high jumper is lifting his arm up because he wants to generate additional momentum. And the American says, no, I don't do this. I keep my arms down because it doesn't make sense. Something like this, I'm paraphrasing. When in reality, even the American athlete is lifting his arms up, but not as far. But officially, he states that he doesn't do it. So what Dr. Yesis is saying, that even when you're looking for perfect technique and you go to these world-class guys, they sometimes tell you things that they do that they don't really do. Yeah. And that makes sense, because just because, here we go again, just because you're a world-class athlete doesn't mean that you understand the biomechanical realities of the movement patterns that you are executing. You don't. And that's why many athletes, when they leave their sports, they're like lost. They don't know how to train, right? It's
too hard. It's the techniques are too fast to see.
Yeah.
Because they happen at 0.15 to 0.35 seconds. That's the speed strength cycle. That's the speed of sport.
So fast, man.
So it's so fast, you don't necessarily see it. And at the same time, you can't see yourself. One person cannot coach themselves. You need two eyes and one other brain on you to be successful in sport.
You're so right.
Because you can't do it. It's too hard. There's too much to this. There's so many different variables that go into high-level performance that, honestly, the last person I hate asking my athletes how to do things, because they're going to, and especially with baseball players, there is a huge issue with baseball players where they all want to hit the same way. They all want to hit the baseball. Oh, no. Let me rephrase that. They all want to hit the baseball their own way, their own style. Because they're like, oh, it feels right to me. I'm like, will you stop it? Like, there's a physical way to do this. There's a way your body runs on physics. Mm-hmm. There is a movement pattern that will generate the most force on average. Mm-hmm. Statistically, you have to start moving towards that optimal movement pattern. And just because it doesn't feel right to you, that doesn't make it wrong. Like, how do you know best? You're just a 14-year-old baseball player.
All right. So
but in the United States, honestly, a lot of that kind of thinking gets encouraged, where it's like, do things your way, do your own individual. But you look at other baseball leagues, like the Japanese baseball leagues, the Latin American baseball leagues, they all hit the same way, and they're more consistent because they know that they can't get away with it. You don't have as many bodies. And it goes back to the coaching philosophy I told you about. Exactly. It's like, why try to change every kid? Like, whoever hits the
just
best,
encourage them. Yeah, just encourage them. They just let them play the sport.
Push hope.
Another thing is, there is merit to this idea of let your natural instincts flow. That's what I teach in here, because A, I don't have athletes. B, they don't have to move in a certain way. And how can I say this? I read the book from Michael Myers, Anatomy Trains, and even though it is high-level literature, I skimmed a lot of it because it's just way too intense how he describes it. But one sentence stuck out to me. He said, there is the imposed way of teaching and the exposed way of teaching. The exposed way tells you what you're doing wrong, and you're supposed to correct it. And the exposed way of teaching highlights the flaws, but lets you find your own groove, so to speak. And I think both can be applicable. And I think with a fitness population, just one great example. Everybody squats differently because your hip is built differently. Your femur is built differently. I have a so-called Slavic hip. My femur sits loose in the hip, and I think probably in my sockets point a little bit more to the left and to the right respectively. And that's why I'm able to go down into a deep squat, pushing my knees out, and I do a so-called Chinese squat. Going down, ass to grass, my back's like this. But then you have somebody else who has a Celtic hip, and a Celtic hip is more restricted, but they're able to execute and produce more force, but they're not able to squat down like I can. So in that regard, it makes sense to tell them. I just had a comment yesterday. Somebody commented this and said, listen, this deep squat that you're showing, it just feels right to me. And the other squat, I'm not sure. We have the other example as well. One guy is telling me, listen, your squat with ass to grass, it's impossible for me. It hurts. And I feel like something's limiting me. And then I'm telling them, probably it's your joints, right? They don't allow more movement. Totally fine. Skip the front squat. Skip the goblet squat. Do back squats. You're fine. So in that regard, it makes sense. However, when it comes to athletic endeavors and ability, there are skills that you have to do in order, like you said, in order to produce the highest return on investment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you don't have to confuse the two. You have to make sure that, no, we can't do things differently here because A, that's the biomechanically speaking, the best way to do it. So do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel right.
Odds.
Exactly. Yeah, but it doesn't feel right. Doesn't matter. You have to do it, right?
Right.
Whereas in the general population, there's more leeway. But yeah. You have to see the difference.
Yes, and it's so everybody's different. Like, it really kind of blew me away when I started training like generational clients, where like I started working like in adult fitness and doing muscle tests on these adult clients, and then I started working with their kids, doing similar testing and finding that at a very young age, like 5, even 6, they have the exact same imperfections. So sometimes you're just born that way.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And there's similar patterns. There's like 4 to 5 different variations of like people that I've realized. Like and depending, and honestly, depending on how your squat interacts, a lot of that has to do with like the flexibility and the mechanics of your foot. Try to do this when you start working with your clients. If they're ever barefoot and you got a big variety, like a big difference between the two movements, look at their feet and look at what their feet are doing. Do they have high arch bones? Mm-hmm. Do their toes cramp together? Are they flat-footed? Do they have collapsed arches? Mm-hmm. Do they push to the outsides of their feet? Do they push to the insides of their feet? And then when you kind of look at that, you can realize that that a lot of movement patterns, like for example, athletes that have high arch bones, that I've seen a lot of the times, they have weak glute minimus, weak glute max, overdeveloped TFL, overdeveloped glute medius. And their ability to squat is very limited because that high arch bone in their foot puts a lot of tension on that anterior tibialis, so it can't slide very well in the squat position, and they can't flat foot squat all the way down. They usually end up going to their forefoot.
Exactly. Exactly. We see that too.
The IT bands are too tight. Like I had an athlete that I worked with for a very long time. She had this high arch bones. Oh, and they're usually weaker in their quads, by the way, high arch athletes. They usually are overdeveloped in the calves, underdeveloped in the quads. So when I was working with this athlete, she was a professional fighter. She had the same issue, and we worked together forever. And I tried to we tried to re-strengthen all the muscle groups, try to rebuild all the different areas. But after years, she still had the same patterns. So here's what I come to a conclusion, is that you can't fully correct anything,
exactly.
But you can optimize it.
You can optimize it. Oh, that's a very good point. It's the same with a client that I have. He's such a tall dude, and because of his tallness, is that a word? Tallness, or because he's so tall, his height, yeah. Because of his height, he has limitations that I don't have. It's because it's such long femur, long humerus. The shoulder. I used to think that his shoulder, that he had an injury, but he said no injury. He's so extremely limited in the shoulder, and I said, listen, never happened anything. He said, no, totally fine. So we did some mobility work, but also we did a lot of strengthening work, of course, with kettlebells and stuff. And as we know, weight training, if you do it properly, also stretches the muscle. But he's always limited. And so I realized, you know what? Seems like that's just your shoulder. Do you have any pain? No. Okay. Let's do what your body is allowing us to do. And I think in that regard, we optimized it. Of course, it's way better, but there's still this limitation.
Yeah. Sometimes
and I'll let it.
The tissue is just shaped that way.
Exactly, and we let it be. And I say, you know what? You'll never do this like I can. You can never pull your arms back. It's impossible. But who cares? Totally fine, right? And in the athletic world, I think it's also then realizing that yes, there might be certain limitations, but why not use the best system to optimize it and later find out, okay, seems like that's just your natural limitation that you have, right? Most of the time, it's like you have to be, like you mentioned, a genetic freak, unless because if you're not, you won't even make it to the team, right?
Yeah, and it's like I said, and always keep in mind, like, sports is not like necessarily good for your body. Like sports is very damaging. Like people who stay into athletics, or not even that, like even just if they stay a lifetime athlete and stop after high school, they have knee issues, back issues, they have athletic imbalances because of over adaptations.
Yeah.
You know, like it is not like throwing a baseball as hard as you can or kicking a soccer ball 1,000 times with your right leg is not good for you.
Yeah.
You can do it and it's awesome. So we trade, but I try to explain to athletes, like, listen, we're on a path towards destruction at all times with this. Like even training, we're lightly damaging your body so you'll adapt to become stronger. But this is an exit. Like you are not going to do this at 35. Very rarely. Like it's going to break you down. Your shoulders are going to go. Your knees are going to go. It's so demanding on the body. So what can we do to keep things as optimal as possible for as long as you have in sports? Because it's a very short window.
Very short time frame. Yeah, most definitely. And I always, you know what I always say? I always say, man, if your knees are banged up, shoulders banged up, spine banged up, I hope your bank account's properly set up now.
Yeah.
Because that's what sometimes really gets me. It's like elite performance is destructive. And if it doesn't pay well at the end, I don't know, man. Having a destroyed knee and then living paycheck after paycheck, even though you have been the #1 player in a sport that nobody cares about. I'm like, why are you even? I mean, everybody has to decide for themselves. That's normal. But for me, it just doesn't add up. That's why people ask me all the time. Sometimes they're like, why are you not competing in kettlebell sport competitions? I'm like, because it doesn't make sense. Why?
Yeah.
Doesn't pay and it's destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's nothing. It's you know where I want to compete? In the business world, in the YouTube realm, in me being the best trainer ever in my area. That's where I want to compete, but I want to be healthy. That stuff doesn't pay. And it takes away time and that I have to dedicate to other things then. That I can't dedicate to other things. So, yeah. Hey, Quintin, we got to wrap it up. It's 1 hour and 50 minutes again. But you know, I love this, man. But you know what? We have to, we like I mentioned, we have to make this a series. And because I'm really, really enjoying this. I'm learning a lot. And of course, I'm sure our viewers and listeners will learn a lot. And we have to focus on this topic again the next time.
I'm thinking for the next episode. The next episode, I'm thinking, because we kind of like run out the history of how we kind of arrived here.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's taken us a few hours, but we've landed here now. Now, maybe on the next episode, I'll kind of talk about where things can go from here and what we can do to help more athletes and to help more people.
That's a good point. And you could also elaborate a little bit on this type of nerve muscle training or
right. We'll get into the nervous system training.
Nervous system training.
Yep. And you know, like, because there's I'm kind of like at an interesting spot with my life right now, where COVID really reshaped everything. as far as fitness and sports.
Mm-hmm.
And Marv Marinovich was under the philosophy of keeping everything really secretive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was like, don't tell people what you, like, show them what you do, but don't tell them how you do it. But unfortunately, Marv has passed away back in 2020. The community amongst trainers who do this nervous system training, like, a lot of them had to stop, you know, because it just wasn't sustainable. So I'm kind of at this point where, you know, at the end of the day, I kind of do want to share a lot of these training methods and a lot of the secrets to what we do, because, you know, the bottom line is it's going to help more people than hurt more people. You know, so this is where I'm kind of separating myself from the rest of, like, these other trainers, the rest of the industry. I do kind of want to open up the books and the training philosophy and how to do this, you know, so hopefully, like, the viewers or the information could get spread and it could help more people. Because at the end of the day, I think that is much more important than trying to, like, be like the best trainer in my local business, is to see if we can offer more value to more people to help change their lives. I think that is more important in the long run.
I think that's a good point. You know, what I always do is, even I always say, when I share the information that I share about the stuff that I do, I go all out, because I want to sell the house without you even having to buy it. And in many cases, people come to you because they want to buy it anyway.
Right.
Out of gratitude, or because they know, you know, just hearing the information, like you mentioned, doesn't cut it. You need somebody else who's watching you, teaching you. And that's why I'm all out in sharing information. But of course, you can go your own pace. So the next time, I'm really looking forward. We're going to take a deep dive into the system. And let's wrap it up in that case. It was really awesome again. So here's the next step that you have to do. Like the video, consider subscribing, share it with a friend who's also interested in kettlebells, and then go watch this playlist where you have all the powerful conversations that I have had with the greatest minds in the kettlebell world. If you enjoyed this podcast, you're going to enjoy these other ones as well. So go click on it and watch it right now.